Whoa, so nobody was just going to tell us that there was an estimate of the amount of Indians that was enslaved as well as an estimate of the amount of Africans brought to America? See, one of the main and biggest lies told to most black Americans today to make them believe they have African ancestry is the estimates that was given of the amount of so-called Africans that came to America during the transatlantic slave trade. See, today's most historians or professors get their estimates and calculations mainly from a man named Philip D. Kirkins. He was considered the main foundational source for the estimates of the transatlantic slave trade, and he wrote a book called The Atlantic Slave Trade Assistant that tells in details just how the estimates of the transatlantic slave trade came about. But peep, he says on the first page, he says, first of all, what were the round numbers involved in the forced immigration to which African-Euro trade gave rise, beginning in the 15th century and ending in the 19th? He said the short answer is that nobody knows or will ever know. Either the necessary records are missing or they were never made. He says the best one can do is construct an estimate from confused and incomplete data. Now, you're probably wondering, how can you get estimates from confused and incomplete data? Well, see, most of the estimates for the transatlantic slave trade were estimates that was agreed upon by the majority and other so-called credible sources. And one of the main sources that Philip D. Kirkins used for his book, that even goes back, that was used also by W.E.B. Du Bois, was Edward E. Dunbar from his book, The Mexican Papers. Now, the thing that was so special about Edward E. Dunbar's book, The Mexican Papers, is he didn't just give an estimate of the amount of Africans that came to America, but he also gave an estimate of the amount of indigenous Americans that were supposedly enslaved. See, because in his book, he states, and there must be born in the mind that when Spain ruled Spanish-American countries on this continent, the aborigines of those countries were held as slaves. This was Spanish-American, how much they controlled. So understand, the indigenous people within them areas were the ones being enslaved. See, he has in his book right here, he said the slave population in 1790, he said there were 3 million enslaved Negroes. But peep under this, he said 7 million enslaved Indians. Then he also states that there was about 300,000 Brazilian Indians that wasn't even included in our enumeration of the Indian slaves that were liberated by the revolution in 1810 on the continent of South America. And now, he said the exact same thing as Philip D. Kirkins said in his book. He said, in the first place, no thorough or complete official records of this traffic were kept by the nations that engaged in it. He said the interests of the business required a suppression of the definite information relative to the prosecution. So he's telling you up front, all of these records and estimates are just estimates and guesstimates. But the thing is, he at least included and actually acknowledged that there were more indigenous Americans that was enslaved than there was Africans brought to America. Hell, even today, now, due to we have more technology and information, they now say there was only 388,000 to 450 Africans that actually came to North America. But historians also estimate that there were 2.5 to 5 million indigenous Americans that were enslaved in North America, excluding Mexico. And the reason this is so important is because of the fact history has been trying to say Black American history only comes from slavery. But when you ask the real question, okay, well, who were the real slaves in North America? There was only 300 to maybe 400,000 that came to America. And now they're saying there's 2.5 to 5 million indigenous Americans that was enslaved. So 2.5 to 5 million versus 300 to 400,000, that's a large difference. So you're not going to tell me that majority of the Black Americans descended from 300 to 400,000 Africans instead of the 2.5 to 5 million indigenous Americans. Make that make sense. Please, make it make sense. So yeah, if you want to put Black Americans history and say we only come from slavery, make sure you mention those slaves were indigenous Americans, and they were slaves of war, not slaves of captivity. Thank you. Love you. Peace.